Hello, everybody. I'm going to give a quick bonus edition of the Ngoma drum series. I just left a lecture with Tommy Smith, and I'm really going to do this for my students to watch as well. But Tommy Smith, 1968 Olympics, broke the 20-second time barrier in the 200. Him and John Carlos raised their fists as part of social protests in the way that African Americans were being mistreated in the world. I just got back from a lecture with him on the new book, which I'll show at Philadelphia, the main library. Amazing lecture. I'm going to link that and show whoever wants to watch it as bonus content here. And I'm just sad about how not well attended it was. It was phenomenal. They came out with a new book, what they call a graphic book. We would call it cartoons. The illustrator's from Philadelphia. I'm going to try to get him for our series, and the writers. It was phenomenal. And now here is about 20 minutes of the interview. By the way, did I tell you that they signed the book, all three of them? It just doesn't get any better. There's Tommy Smith, the writer, and the graphic designer. It was absolutely amazing. All right, now here is at least 20 minutes of the interview from today.
And at that time, you're preparing to go to the Olympics, but even as early as 1967, you and other black athletes were prepared to boycott the Olympics if it came down to it. And I'd like for you to take us back to that time and give us a sense of what was happening that made all of you so willing to potentially even sit out the Olympics if it felt like that was the right thing to do?
We thought sacrifice was an option that we had to take to suspend ignorance of those who believed the equality was a thing that shouldn't happen. It was time for the athletes, especially the black athletes, to stand up in unison for a right which the Constitution had already granted, but we were not given. And we didn't speak very much while competing because competition was our first option coming to, second option actually. The education process was the first, but competition. So we competed, especially this young, very quiet guy here, competed. That was my way of setting a standard for oneself to do what was necessary for any human being that was concerned about a country to grow and go forward. This was our way of communicating with not just the San Jose community, but the entire world. They wanted to hear, so we wanted to tell them, and that's how the story got started.
And you mentioned San Jose. You went to San Jose State, Speed City. We know what was going on in the country, but what was going on more closely for you and for other black athletes that you were willing to potentially make that sacrifice?
Survival, and to send a message that here we are ready, we're committing ourselves, in fact our lives, to the success of equality. And the youth of this country, the young folks, they needed a platform to stand on. So I not only ran for them, but I also stood on the victory stand for the young generation and the world as a whole, suspending everything else but what the information, the story we had to tell, and we had to stand up under the pressures of the entire world in a positive manner, because there was so much negativity out there toward us, because we were viewing us as bandits instead of those who putting our lives on the line for the success of equality and what it can preserve in perpetuity.
I want to rewind to the late 1940s in rural Texas, where you were born. You had 11 brothers and sisters, and your parents were sharecroppers. If we were to go back to that time, what would a day in your life have looked like back then?
I don't know where to start, the beginning or the end of the question, but it's a very complicated situation. Times then for a family that size was very difficult. And when you stay in a little shack with all those brothers and sisters, with 7 sisters and 4 brothers, it was kind of difficult. So We had 3 little shacks once we moved to California, just to survive, just to move forward. And that was the legacy of the Smith family then, is to maintain the gratitude of the Most High, and to do what we could to create an avenue for growth of us and growth of people. And we had a plethora of families that came on those old gray dingy buses from the fields of Texas to the fields of California. And that was the legacy for me to move proactively forward. Even as a little kid, my ears sticking out side of my head like little antenna, as you said in the book. But we were proud to do so because we had no other choice.
And you worked in the fields all the time. I mean, your schooling for your early years was rather limited because you had to be in the fields helping to work. You didn't have plumbing. You didn't have so much of what we take for granted now.
We had nothing really but our lives, our God-given possessions, our lives, and our love for people, and especially our families. And yes, picking cotton, chopping cotton, cutting grapes, irrigating, hay baling. Some of you folks out there know what some of these things are. Some of you out there don't know what the heck is this man talking about. But we did it all. We had to do it all. Go to school during the day and work from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning in the fields when the night irrigation was necessary. I, at 12 years old, worked with my dad because I was 6 to 5 to 11, I guess, at that time. So I could get man's pay. That was big. It was $12 a night for 12 hours. But going to school, I was walking from work to home or riding in this old bus, old pickup my dad had, which I could run fast and they could go at top speed just to get home to catch the bus to go to school all day long. Then football, basketball, track practice after school. When that finished, me and Daddy, I would meet my dad at home on the front porch. He'd be waiting for me. Told me, boy, let's go to work. I just came from school, tired, sweating, hungry. I didn't have the best perfume in the world, so you know what was next. That's how we survived.
Yeah.
The love of the family. Love of the family and each other.
Derrick, I'd like to ask how you and Dr. Smith came to collaborate on this project together.
This was in 2018. I was at the American Library Association conference in New Orleans. And my agent took me around to different publishing houses in the conference hall, and we had to be about 60 yards away from the W.W. Norton booth. Simon Boughton is out there, he's the publisher, and she just asked me, just out of the blue, think you want to write a book about Dr. Tony Smith? I was like, sure. So we went out to the booth and I shook his hand, and that was it for me. But I think this is probably my 15th book, and I am very conscious of my body of work and what I want to leave behind, and I write intentionally to uplift the beauty and the brilliance of Black children. I'm unapologetically do that. You know what I mean? So this book just fit perfectly into my wheelhouse in order to tell this man's story. It's been a privilege. I was able to go down to his house. I think I've been over twice. I brought my family over the second time. We have 4 boys. So my second eldest boy, he was at a football camp, and we just stopped by. He made sandwiches for us and everything. But that's pretty awesome. But the first time I came by, stayed all day. His lovely wife made lunch, and I sat down in this man cave. It's galleries. It's like a small museum. Just fan art, trophies, medals, pictures of dignitaries from all over the world, famous athletes, and I just took notes. Just sat at his feet, took notes. We had a great conversation. He and I have a lot in common as far as personality goes. He's very laid back, calm, thoughtful person, and just had a good time. I left there. I couldn't believe it. It was pitch black, and I just left Tony Smith's house. I had a full notebook, and I was ready. I was ready to get going. So now I have to think about the how was I going to tell the story? Was it going to be in a verse? Was it going to be a straight novel? But the graphic novel idea just seemed so perfect because I'm talking about a man who was once the fastest man on the planet, and the graphic novel format just seemed perfect. I had never written a graphic novel before, so it was a challenge for me, but I was up for it. And I see a lot of you have the copies in your hand. Hopefully we did a good job. God willing, we did a good job. So, yeah.
Well, you found the right graphic artist in
Yes, sir.
and
Philly's own.
How did the process work for you, Dawus? Were you involved during the writing of the book, or do you get the manuscript and then think about what illustrations you want to add to it? How does that work?
For this project, I came in when the manuscript was already done. Derrick actually recommended me for the project, and so when I came on board, I got to read through the manuscript a couple times, and then I do a first set of like storyboard roughs where I go through it, and then I still go back and I'll talk to Derrick about, if I have certain questions, like, hey, how do you see this scene, and we're both open, it's like I'm open to his opinion, and sometimes he says, hey, if you got a better idea, you can run with it. So then that kind of like alleviates pressure of feeling like, am I doing this right? And then also I got to go to Dr. Smith's house, because I live in Stone Mountain, Georgia now. I've been there for like 22 years now. And I got to stop by Dr. Smith's place and also go down and check out his archives, and I got a taste of his history and his life, and and to talk to him personally, because it's one thing when you're drawing, because I do like a lot of animation. My background is animation and comics, graphic novels, and even storyboards for film and television. But it's one thing when you're doing projects for that that are made up, and then you're doing a biopic on somebody's life, and then you're doing somebody they're here, so they can say, hey, that ain't my life, so they had that added pressure. Because I'd recently done Becoming Muhammad Ali, but it was about his childhood, but of course he's not here now, so it was an honor to do it, but I couldn't get his perspective. Yeah. But with Dr. Smith, that was really, if I was to talk about anybody's opinion, I wanted to know how did he feel about it. Because to me, I'm going to put in my best effort to tell his story based on the things that he shared with me. And we're dealing with another era of time, that was before me. So I tell him, I channel anyway when I draw, but I call this one really was spiritual channeling, because I always consider myself a conduit. And I pull from things from my ancestors, because his story, I feel like, is my story. Yeah. So that's why I was able to feel the characters and the scenarios and the situations, and I just put that into the story.
Dr. Smith, let's fast forward to 1968, October. You've decided that you are going to Mexico City, but there's still a possibility of maybe a protest of some sort, but nobody's quite sure what it's going to look like. Let's start with you in the starting block, the finals of the men's 200 meters. Take us back to that moment. You're in the starting block, the gun goes off. What happens?
Explosion. Folks, let me tell you, that was my whole life. I worked all those years, cotton fields, cold nights, irrigation in the San Joaquin Valley, all the way through high school, college. And that race, my whole life, that was it. But just before that race, the race before, I had injured my leg severely. A groin muscle area in my left leg, which is my power leg. So once we got in the block area for the 200 meter finals and I was injured, I was afraid to do my warm-up, because I was afraid I would not only just injure the muscle again, but actually destroy it, pull it, because of the power I had and the fortitude I had to win the race. I had trained to win. I don't like to lose. I don't care what race it is. I don't like to, it's fun, yeah. Even more fun when you win. That is my back. I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall, same height I was. And standing there with my hands on my hip, and you saw the picture. just looking at these powerful world-class athletes taking their practice starts. And Tommy Smith, the world record holder, standing there looking at them. And I couldn't practice start. So the challenges grew in me. What am I going to do, Lord? What am I? You put me here, Lord, now. Come on, man, help me out. This was I'm talking to myself. I can remember like yesterday. And when he said, think about this. You're in the blocks. Your whole life is in front of you. Everything. Mama, daddy, 11 brothers and sisters watching somewhere. Here is their brother in the blocks. Starter said, on your marks. Get set. In nanoseconds, my whole life, zip, went right through my body. But I could not forget the first thing that a sprinter needs to know is the first 3 steps. And being 6'4", I was traumatized because I was so long that I had to get out with a pull muscle as fast as I could to get in front of John Carlos, Peter Norman, Derrick, and the rest of them. And guess what place I was in when I came out the blocks and found out that this is it. I was in 4th place. I've never been in 4th place coming out of the block, coming off the turn. And as I came off the turn and straightened up, John Carlos was out in front of me. Read the Bible to everybody. And I said, okay, John, I'm going to take Hebrew 11:1, faith. And I lift up, you can see it in the race, and I just release all the emotions. It was like 4th gear in a 5-gear car. Just went by everybody. And I said, I told you so, like a little kid. I told you I was going to do it. And 6-8 meters from the finish line, I did what sprinters, if you're in here, you never do, throw your arms up. You're going to race to finish the race with pride, justice, and authenticity. That was it. I know I went overtime, but that was it, that race. And those feet.
And you did it all in 19.83 seconds.
Yes, ma'am.
So, right after that, what happened next was something that you described as planned spontaneity. As I said, there was the possibility of some sort of protest, but take us back to that moment when you and John Carlos were about to receive your medals. You're thinking about how are we going to, get our message across. What did you do in that moment?
John and I had talked about it a few minutes before. The Olympic Project for Human Rights was a great platform of a lot of different things. And the OPHR, which is the Olympic Project for Human Rights, was under this, within this platform. And we had to make sense of what everyone else in the world didn't know because we hadn't told anybody anything. But we had a message. The boycott was called off because a lot of the things we had on the boycott list to be done before we competed, if we competed, it was done. And when we walked out on the track, we had already discussed the black socks representing poverty, the black glove representing power, not necessarily black power, but social power, power to move forward uniformly with justice. Nobody heard us before that race. We had did finished a lot of talking to the medias about the necessary things that needed to be done in the world of sports, especially track and field. But no one did say anything. But we thought it necessary to make a justified plea one more time to the world about the need for justice to be identified. And the Olympic Project for Human Rights Victory Stand was the final act, and that was not of hate, but of pride, justice, and power. Yes, we were black. People call it the Black Power sign. I call it the Olympic Project for Human Rights, not black rights, not Hispanic rights, not any other but everybody. Not any other but everybody. And that's what the Olympic Project stand, the Victory Stand, was about. The unity of those who believe that there are subhumans, and there's this thing as subhuman. We're all human on the same, that we were created that way. If you think of any other way, you're wrong.
So in the course of 80 seconds, Your entire life changed after you raised your fist. The backlash was pretty quick. Your lives changed immensely after that time. Talk about the price that you paid for making that gesture.
The price was a loss. It was a classified loss within a society of two young black men who did what we did to propagate a foundation that was necessary for us to move on, not only in athletics, but as a unified social structure called America. And we did it gladly. We put our lives on the line just to do that. And it's illustrated very well from page 170 on to 204, I think it's in the book. So we dedicated that race to the world, and we made it very appropriate by the thought process of viewing, because we had no time to talk. And yes, it was probably 80 seconds. And during that 80 seconds, I prayed the whole time. I heard the sound, but I prayed the whole time because I was afraid I would get blown off the victory stand by some sniper hidden in the stand, because our lives has been threatened so many times before we got to Mexico. And when we got to Mexico, we realized how many Mexican students were killed because they stood up for human rights just before we got there. So what would you think? Mexican student blood still laying on the street, and we're walking, looking at it and wondering, are we going to be lying there as well? So there's a lot of things on the young 24-year-old's mind who had a 6-month-old son and a wife that I would leave vacant because I put up my life. Like Dr. Martin Luther King had only been killed 6 months before. So, we can go on and talk about this, but I'll quit now so these young minds over here can sojourn with me on this.
In terms of the loss in the immediate aftermath, I mean, you lost your job, your marriage fell apart. You and John Carlos were swiftly sent back to the United States, and not to a hero's welcome, but to quite the opposite. And then, my understanding is that the FBI had been watching you all for quite a long time.
Yeah, I giggle at this because they work all the time. Even my first job over in college, where I became a professor at 27 years old. They followed me there, found me in a barbershop in the neighborhood. And over the town is only 5,700, and the college was bigger than the town. So they found me across the railroad track. Yeah, I know, guys, I had hair then, okay? So they cut my hair, and I'm sitting there chilling, and I saw this raggedy old car passing 2 or 3 times with a little sneaky antenna sticking out of the trunk. So I knew it was more than me and my brother walking down the street with an antenna that stuck up, and so the car stopped beside my old car, which was a 57 Derrick Plymouth. And he got out, looked into the car, and as he bent over, I could see that there was more under their coat than a belt pulling their pants up because of the bulge that came out. So they looked at the barbershop and they came over. I said, oh my God, here. And the people in the barbershop didn't know who I was sitting there. So they came in the back door and they opened the door. And is there a Tommy Smith in here? Yeah, I'm cool. And everybody looked around. Tommy Smith. And he said, I said, can you hear me? Is there a Tommy Smith in the room? So I had to vindicate their idea of being shy. So I said, I'm Tommy Smith. They asked me, could you come outside? We want to talk to you. I said, no, not right now. I'm getting a haircut. Meet me back in my office in a half an hour. I didn't tell them where. So when I got back to my office, they were sitting at my door. I opened my door and said, gentlemen, come on in. So I went and sat at my desk, propped my feet up on my desk, cut my coleus plants. I'm a plant green farmer. Cut my coleus plant, and I said, what do you guys want? He said, well, we want to know a few things, Mr. Smith. Do you know a person by the name of Patty Hearst? Okay, there's a long story behind that. So I told him, no, I know where she's from. I know what she's noted for, but she hasn't come to this office. Well, why Patty Hearst? Because the person who hired me knows Patty Hearst very well. So he came to see me because he wasn't there. They had fired him already. So we talked for about half an hour. And I told him a bit of my history, a bit of my coleus plant that was sitting behind me. After about 15 minutes, they got up, "Thank you, sir. We need somebody like you in our league." I said, "Thank you very much, but I have one." That was it.
Yeah.
Basically. Those little things I can't tell you the word we use.
Can you clarify, Dr. Smith, did they take your medals or were you allowed to keep them?
We were not allowed to keep them. We kept them anyway.
Was your case then?
No, we didn't hide them. We told them, no way, we ran the race. We did nothing wrong. Why you want to take our medals? And they had really no courageous answer. They had sneaky answers like, "Well, we believe that you will get them back, but we just want to take them to show people that the need of." And John, I gave the phone to John Carlos after that. We can't say what John said either, so you know that. Yeah, right. So no, they threatened us, of course, especially Douglas Rogan, who was the president of the USOC, United States Olympic Committee. And then we wondered why he did. He said the IOC, which is the International Olympic Committee, told him if he didn't, they would disqualify the rest of the track and field team. So we kept our medals, and we still have our medals, and my medals in the state I was born, where I picked cotton, chopped cotton, all that stuff. My medals in that state, and it is the state of what, wife? Clarksville, Texas. Just so I just wanted y'all to hear her voice.
So, Dr. Smith, after all those years of loss and the heavy price that you all paid for standing up in that way, somewhere around 2000, the tide begins to turn. And now all of a sudden people are viewing that event in a different way, and they're seeing the two of you in a different way. What changed?
The turmoil of the 60s was a rallying point for people to understand that there was a need for change. All the assassination, the bombing of babies in churches, police brutality, knees on parts of the body that should not have been because it choked people to death, and certain other things you said in the book. So that you have to read. It's all itemized, and just social change, time for social change, because of so many social things that was happening, and people begin to understand that I have a voice, meaning you have a voice, and you need to be unrestrained by keeping quiet, because silence is not an option. If you want something done, you have to open your mouth and do it yourself. Let me ask you a question. How many times have you been in a conversation and wanted to say something, but you were afraid that you'd be laughed at because of the way you talk or the way you looked or the answer you give? But that is not what to be thought of. Answer the question. Don't wait until you have to say, "Oh, I should have answered. I knew the answer to that. I should have said something." It's too late. So young folks, speak up. Silence is not an option. Speak your piece, smile, or you don't have to smile while you're doing it, but do more than sit there and be identified as calm. Say something and stand up behind your answer to whatever you say. Don't be silent. I'm not going to go over and over that again. You folks have over an age limit know what I'm talking about. If you want to be heard, silence won't do it.
Time is getting away from us quickly, and I do have a few more questions for you, Dr. Smith, and also I'm coming back, Derrick and Dawus, to you as well. But Dr. Smith, before we move on, I wonder what you were thinking as you watched Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed and modern day athletes taking a knee and making their own form of protest that was so reminiscent of what you did in 1968.
They had a platform. They used the platform to again move toward more. Actually, it was a tranquil way of letting the system know that yes, I am somebody. I will do to help whomever I can. I will sacrifice to do just this. this is why, and they gave their reasons why. Folks, have a reason for every move you make. So when you answer it, you'll answer with some solidified questions so people can understand that you can communicate. Young folks, communicate. Communication through education. Understand that. Don't be afraid. Don't sit in the back of the room and wish you had to sit in the front so you could hear the teacher, so you would got a C on the test instead of an F. Don't want to get off too far because I forget the question. Real quick, I forget the question. What's the question?
We were talking about Colin Kaepernick and just watching athletes take a stand.
I've talked to Colin a few times about that. Eric, not too much, but Colin, and he said that he did what he thought he should do. He was born, raised in the same area I was in California. So we knew the plight that was there where we lived and all over the world. You know, the man played professional football for 7 years, I think, won Super Bowl, and so he saw a lot of things in his sport that needed to be touched upon, and he used that. You know, he was on his knees more than just at one time, but he was not recognized until other athletes started doing what he was doing. Then the cameras caught guys on their knees. Again, they were pariahs in media because they wanted the first chance to make news. And of course, like in 1968, the writers of the story first were very negative of what they were doing because negativism made big news then, especially if it was a black athlete doing something to identify the needs of a system to change its ways. Because the 60s were definitely the time of social change with the presidents, Byrd and Dr. King, and etc. It went through the whole realm of murders during the 60s, and that's but so Colin and Eric, they caught on, and other athletes too. Look at the athletes now who are talking about certain issues, which is very important, and that's the push of this book. Eric here did his name Derrick, isn't it? Oh, Derrick. I know, that wasn't funny at all. That's who it was. I'm just a human being, folks, just like you are. I got a few world records and a few stuff in my name. I'm just like anybody else, doing what I think is necessary to grow a system proactively. So I'm going to let y'all think of the other things I got to say and move on to the other guys here.
A couple of questions before we turn it over to our audience. Derrick, we may have some aspiring writers in our audience. You've written a number of books. What advice would you have for someone who might consider following in your footsteps?
When I graduated, I'm a graduate of probably the greatest HBCU in the country, Jackson State University. My first job was I wrote greeting cards for Hallmark Cards, and there were some lifers there, people who have worked there for 30, 40 years, talented illustrators, writers, and one of the things that the editorial staff really pushed was that we work on developing our voice, and your voice is your writing style. That if there were no names on the cover of the book and a reader picked up the book, they would be able to tell that it was your story, it was your writing style that was being used. So I really started working on my cadence, working on my voice, but most importantly, when I got into the publishing industry, I found that as a black man, as a black writer, it's really important that you figure out your audience. Who are you writing for? And I think a lot of times, we just want to get put on, we just want to land that big contract, and that's not so important. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier, your body of work is what's most important. My greatest legacy is my wife and my 4 sons. But from an artistic standpoint, when I'm done here, when I'm no longer writing, I want people to say, he really tried to say something. And so you have to think about your audience. What are you trying to say? Who are you writing for? I think that all artists have a obligation, to humanity. But if you're a black artist in this country, you have no other choice but to be an activist, whether you're an illustrator, a musician, an actor. You are an activist just by the sheer nature that you were born black in this country. And so, develop your voice. Read everything that you can get your hands on. I read constantly. I'm constantly trying to get better. I think that's another thing we have. He'll try to beat everybody down the steps or, to the dinner table. Very competitive. I am still trying to, develop my voice. Still trying to get better. I read a lot just to see what different writers use, different devices, and kind of weave it into my style. I'm a huge music fan, so I think my style is very lyrical, but you have to figure out what your voice is going to be. So read everything that you can get your hands on and write every single day. I write every day, whether it's a love letter to my wife or it's the next few pages in a book that I'm working on 3 projects right now. Writers write. I mean, so many people that want to be published authors and they haven't written a word. They think this is like a lottery, being an artist is like, but it's not that way at all. I struggled for a long time before things popped off for me, but until I figured out who my audience was and who I was writing for, man, I feel so blessed to get up every morning to do what I do, every single morning. So.
And Dawus, before we go to our audience, your advice for maybe we've got some graphic artists in our audience.
Yeah, well, I guess my advice is to just keep working on your craft. And I think that's anything in life. I mean, as long as you're alive, you can be 15, you could be 50, you could be 75, 80. As long as you can breathe and you're functional, you're always going to be a student. So there's never really a point where it's like, hey, I arrived, I know everything, I can stop now, I don't need to learn anything else. Life is going to be there's all things going to keep changing, adjusting, shifting. So you're always going to want to, just stay up on things. And one thing I would say too is do what you love. I always tell people, live your love. Because you can say, hey, I'm doing this to make some money. And money is necessary because that's the tool to help you navigate through life. But also, you want to do something that when you get up in the morning, it's like, regardless if I'm getting paid or not, this is what I want to do. This is what I enjoy. And what happens is other people, they see the love in what you do, and then they want to share in your love, so they give you money. And that's usually how the money comes, from you doing what you love. You know what I mean? So I would just say, continue doing that, and also think about your circle. The people that are around you, do they hold you up? Do they say good things to you? Or do they clown you? Do they say, oh man, you trying to still do this thing? Or just say, they don't say nice things to you. Then you gotta really separate yourself from that. That's regardless if they're friends, family, whatever. You gotta get around people that hold you up and you feel like they're on your team. Because that's really gonna play a part on your psyche and how you feel about yourself. And that's what helps you in the long run.
So that said, thank you for such great advice.
I've studied the Olympics of 1968 because I've had some friends who were involved. I'm not going to name them, but I got some. And I'm not too proud of the stands that they took. But I have always admired you and John for your determination, for your courage, and for your struggle for the people. You didn't stand on that stand for John, Carlos, and yourself. You stood up there for all the rest of us. And that's what the struggle is all about. I'm so thankful that I lived long enough to see you face to face, to tell you that. And I'm hoping that I can do the same for John.
Questions here in the middle, maybe, yes. And then, since they're right behind the yes.
Dr. Smith, you played a tremendous price. You, John Carlos, and to a certain extent, Peter Norman. Can you tell us how you actually survived the backlash after the '68 Olympics? Thank you.
Not giving up. Always on the move for mankind, regardless of male, female, people. And the educational process had to be, for me, one of the biggest motivators for me to move on, because I could teach from my heart that God gave me to the younger generations behind me, because that's the future of America. And I had to do what I had to do because I wasn't me. I was used as a tool for Him to ask for others to understand, and the only way I had was to show as many people as I could on that victory stand. And most people that I know around the world don't know me, but if you hold a fist up, then they will know. They will know where it came from. And most will know that message, like the people here now. You will know that stand was not a stand for hate. It was a signal of hope, for hope, and generations to follow understand that. Talk to yourself in the mirror. Talk to yourself in the mirror. Try to hate yourself in the mirror. You can't do that. I want you to feel that way with persons who are not in the mirror, that you see actually with your eyes that God gave you. You young folks, talk to an old person every once in a while. They have a story. They have a story. This man is 90 years old here. Did you say 90 or 25? And he's still out there hoping, sustaining an effort of survival for a generations to come. It's the only way this world is going to come under a flag of continual hope. We shall overcome is not an option to forget. We are still overcoming. You go, you think you've overcome. No, just turn to the next page and overcome it too. Just continue, don't quit. But I'm going to quit right now.